Yo, what's going on? I hope you're all having a blessed and fantastic day today. So, I've got a question for you all. Why is it difficult for people to make consistent progress, right? Ultimately, the answer to that is because, when people experience failure, as everybody is going to experience failure at some point, there is no growth that results from that failure, right? Thus causing them to doubt themselves. You start beating yourself up. Ultimately, you end up getting discouraged and you just want to quit, right? All because of that simple failure. And the only way to avoid such a scenario is to master a little something I like to call reflection. Right? You simply need to master reflection, right? Sounds very simple, but I find that a lot of people don't actually understand this concept. So to help better explain it, I prepared a little bit of a scenario for you, right? So imagine you're cooking, right? Imagine you've been trained by Gordon Ramsay, 5 years, right? You're cooking on the stove, right? You're cooking your favorite food. It's on the pan, right? I'm no Picasso, but we can imagine that this is a beautiful pan, right? It's a hot pan. And then we got, there's obviously fire on the pan because you are cooking, right? But then for some reason, right, you're cooking this pan and you decide, you're trying to figure out, oh, is this pan even hot? So you end up, having the bright idea, you're going to touch this pan, right? This is you. All right, you touch that pan. And obviously the result of you touching this pan is that you get burned, right? So you touch the pan, you get burned. And then the thought process that goes through your mind is, I touched this pan, I got burned, I'm not going to do that again. That way, you never touch the pan again and you never get burned by the pan again, right? What you just did is you reflected, right? You made a mistake. You thought about said mistake. You figured out what you need to do to not make that mistake again, and it didn't happen again, right? Now, it sounds like a very simple concept, very, very, very simple to understand, but the problem is that, a lot of people actually don't understand this, right? Because rather than touching hot pans, right, people make mistakes, right? Maybe it's not touching the hot pan, but it might be something else, right? You might, fail at this assignment, that task, fail at staying consistent, right? Ultimately, failure happens, right? But instead of reflecting on those failures, what ends up happening is that they are simply ignored, right? So, failure happens. Failure happens, and when that failure happens, it simply ends up being ignored. Instead of questioning it, instead of figuring out why, you just kind of toss it out your head. And then what ends up happening is that you'll find yourself in that same scenario again. But since you ignored it the first time, there was nothing learned. You did not grow, thus it'll happen again. And the results of this cycle, like you saw at the beginning of this video, right? You're going to start to doubt yourself. You're going to get discouraged. You're going to start to think, I suck. I'll never be able to do this, right? And you'll end up quitting. And that's not how you make progress, right? If you quit, you're not making any progress at all. And realize that the only way to overcome this situation, the only way to escape such a terrible loop is to master reflection, right? So rather than failing and ignoring the failure, you want to fail, and then you want to reflect. And so that's going to look a little bit like this. Like, when you reflect, right, instead of repeating that cycle of failing again, what's going to end up happening is that you grow. You end up growing from this failure. And when you grow from that failure, you make progress, and then eventually you win. You achieve that goal. Now it's not an infinite negative feedback loop. It's a pathway to success, right? But what we need to understand is how exactly does this step happen? This is the most important step, that step of reflection. Well, luckily for you, reflecting is actually pretty easy. There are two extremely simple questions that you want to ask yourself. The first question that you want to ask is why? Why, right? Okay, you failed. Why did I fail, right? So let's imagine, you wake up one day. You wake up, your alarm goes off. Instead of, instantly getting up, getting straight to work, you grab your phone, you start scrolling on Instagram Reels. Next thing you know, 3 hours has passed, and you're like, oh my goodness, I just wasted so much of my time. Then you're spending the rest of the day trying to catch up on all the things you should have been doing, and you end up getting nothing done, right? So That was the failure, right? You ended up not getting anything done for that day. Why did that happen? Oh, I woke up, instead of getting to work, I was scrolling on my phone. Okay, cool. Now you understand why. Next question you want to ask is what? What? I.e., what can I do so that does not happen again? Okay, cool. I woke up, I started scrolling. What do I need to do to wake up and not start scrolling? Okay, maybe instead of having my phone right next to my bed, I'm gonna have it all the way across the room, right? So you put it all the way across the room, and then you wake up, you get up, you turn your alarm off, you're like, oh, I'm already out of bed, I'm gonna go ahead and start working. So that's what you end up doing, right? You reflected, you asked why, you asked what, and then you learned something, right? You learned something. You thought about it and you learned. And learning ultimately leads to you growing. And like we said earlier, growing is what leads to you winning. You failed, you reflected, and you won. Mastering reflection is the key to you making consistent progress and ultimately achieving your goals. Now, but let's imagine this scenario, right? You reflect, you ask why, you ask what, you change the action, and instead of, growing, you end up, you do grow, but you end up failing again, right? Well, you simply repeat the cycle. This is a never-ending game here, right? Ultimately, every single time you fail, every failure you experience, every mistake that you make, ultimately can lead to you growing. Not to say that this growth is always going to lead to your success, but it eventually will. If you repeat that cycle enough times, if you iterate enough times, you're going to learn so much. You're going to grow so much that it would be impossible for you not to get to this bottom point. But the only way to get there is if you're constantly able to reflect. Rather than letting failures be the end of your game, rather than letting failure defeat you, rather than letting failure put you down, you realize, oh, I failed. That means I can grow some more. That means I can learn something new. That means I can keep improving. I can keep iterating. I can keep bettering myself toward getting to this point at the bottom, this point of victory, this point of me winning, accomplishing my goals. It's inevitable, right? It would be impossible for me not to get there. And once you get to that point, well, congratulations. You are on the fast track to being consistent and achieving your goals. Hopefully you found some value in this video. Hopefully you learned something new. And hopefully you realize that, oh, maybe getting consistent, right? Maybe making, consistent progress towards my goals, winning, isn't as hard as I originally thought. For those of you interested in making discipline easier than procrastination so that you can make consistent progress towards your goals, consider joining my community, which will be the first link in the description. Other than that, click this video here if you want to learn something new, and I'll catch y'all in the next one. Peace.